Hello again. Welcome to another lecture. This is going to be just a straightforward lecture on aggregate supply. There's not going to be a lot of flashy graphics. I just want to keep things simple and straightforward. You've just done aggregate demand. You've understood that aggregate demand is all about spending. We're not seeing a lot of spending happening right now. In fact, I think just this quarter, I think we just saw GDP go down by about 4.2%, which obviously that was to be expected. We might see GDP pick up if people start spending money again, if people are more comfortable going out. So we've already looked at aggregate demand, which is the idea that people are spending, or apart from the government, nobody's spending any money. So I want to spend a few minutes just talking about aggregate supply, which is the idea of production. So I want to go ahead through some notes, and then I will release this video online. Obviously, if you're watching it, you know I've released it. All right, so if we look at this picture here, what do we notice? We notice that there's a lot of, we notice that Tyson's in the news right now. Tyson, if you don't know, is the company that is responsible for making chicken. And they have talked about there's going to be a food shortage. They've talked about possibly closing down some of their plants. Now we know that the president has recently said that he doesn't want to do that. And he's ordered the plants to stay open. So that's for a different discussion. Probably over a few drinks. We've also seen businesses requiring their workers to be separated by plastic, or also they're wearing masks. So we're seeing a change in production. We're also seeing restrictions on where people can be in terms of even where they're working. Now, this is people out in public, but we're definitely seeing a lot of restrictions on movement. So really, guys, what the focus on here is the idea of production is being affected by the pandemic, right? In terms of places not being open, in terms of people not wanting to deliver stuff because of being sick, because of workplaces being slowed down because of the pandemic, which obviously they're being slowed down for a good reason. All right. So aggregate supply is all about the production side. If you remember supply and demand from chapter 3, it's very, very similar. If you ever get confused, think about RAP, resources. I'm not going to rap for you. Resources, actions of the governments. For example, red tape, bureaucracy, regulations, tariffs, and productivity. I think the first two are mostly important right now. If you ever get stuck in aggregate demand, think about it. If it affects consumers, if it affects business spending, if it affects government spending or exports, that's SIGEX, that's aggregate demand. So if it was me, I'd be looking for the two key words here for aggregate demand, which would be consumer spending and government spending. All right. So now COVID, of what I've read, is basically seen as what we call a long run shock or long run change. What we're going to discover, as you've discovered in aggregate demand, is there's two types of supply curves. Bit of a twist there. There's a short run and a long run. We'll spend more time talking about the long run here than we will the short run. We're seeing people dying. We're seeing more resources devoting towards the PPEs, which is fine. And we have now laws that restrict movement and production. So right now there's a fundamental change to the economy. This isn't, unfortunately, this is not your Ebola shock or your SARS shock. All right. So what's the new norm? It isn't really good. So the long and aggregate supply curve, guys, if it is basically where we want to be, it represents the economy's potential, right? It's fixed regardless of the aggregate price level. For our case or for our notes, the long and aggregate supply curve looks like the letter L. The long and aggregate supply curve, if it's shifted right, that'd be awesome because we would be at a better situation. So think about this. The long and aggregate supply curve is like basically being able to get better grades, but without giving up, 2 hours sleep. Sorry, without only sleeping 2 hours a day or taking Adderall. The idea is we would be kind of like having a car or engine would be better. Or if you played sports, you could like throw a fastball and baseball better without hurting your arm or taking any steroids. Right, so if the long run aggregate supply curve of the economy's potential depends on things we already know, right? How much resources do we have? Well, we're seeing our workers dying right now, right? So seeing people not showing up for work, the quality of the labor force, and the available technology. So the idea for the economy to sustain itself over the long run is dependent on those concepts. Now, if we had a rightward shift, that'd be amazing, right? Better technology, like automation, digitalization, people going to college, right? Having less trade wars. So now these take time as well. So the point is that the long run is the idea of you go to school, but the long run is basically where do you want to be in the long term, right? So where do you want to be? Ask yourself that question. So the idea is you go to school in order to improve yourself for the next 10 or 20 or 30 years, right? So, or the idea is that you're saving money and in the long term, you hopefully to achieve your goal. So the long run is the big picture now. In the past, if I stood up running for office and said, we're going to improve our colleges or improve our technology, it wouldn't sound really sexy or exciting because they're long run, because they're very far off. All right. Now, the short run average supply curve looks a lot like the one from supply and demand. It's upward sloping. So think of it soaring to the sky, right? We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. Basically, similar to the long run, but this would be temporary. So, for example, what's temporary? The power went out a while back. Your power went out for a couple of hours, or your field is flooded, and the next day it's back to normal, or you have the flu, the normal flu, or you get a bad grade. That's something temporary, but it's not something that's going to affect you for quite a while. All right. So if we have high now, this is very similar to aggregate demand. We have a shift. So if we have more expensive wages, increase the price of raw materials, less productivity, it's a leftward shift. If we have a decrease in wages, a decrease in price of raw materials, an increase in productivity, that would be a rightward shift. So let's focus on these. Adverse supply shock. And right now, that would be something, as I said, something negative, like your field is flooded, or workers don't show up. Now, obviously, right now, it's definitely an adverse supply shock, and it's the long run situation. So if we think about this, guys, we're talking about our potential. What does the word potential mean? So what is our potential? Well, our potential is what we can sustain without hurting ourselves, meaning, okay, you all have the potential to get an A, but what if you only get Bs? Well, what's wrong with that? Well, nothing really if you're able to get your sleep in that you want, if you have a balanced life. So it's basically what you can sustain without causing any physical or mental damage to yourself, right? So the idea is if we're shifting the long run average supply curve, we'd shift the short run. Now, this graph was created way before the pandemic when everything looked really good, but that's not where we're at, right? We're at a really sucky situation. Now, let's bring these two guys together. We talk here about equilibrium. So just to put it in a nutshell, this graph is basically where the economy is, okay? This is the economy in a graph. I know you're thinking, wow, I wish I could do that. Remember, a model is simply a way to describe what's going on. So what we want to do is we want the economy to imbalance. So we want the X to line up with the aggregate long and aggregate supply curve, all right? Then that's where we want everything to be. So if you think about it from supply and demand, you had just the X, because we weren't thinking about long run supply. Now we have a bit of a twist, and we want the economy to be at its potential. So remember, we want the economy to be driving at about 75 miles an hour. We want growth to be about 3%. And obviously, we're not getting that right now. So do you think that we're at long run equilibrium? Well, there's a bit of a twist to that question, or a bit of a catch there. So let's look at that. All right. So we'll get to this slide in a second. But basically, guys, what we have here is a situation of me trying to move something. All right. Sorry, just fighting with something here. So look, as we said before, we're moving from point A to point B. Right. The goal is, right now we're at point B. Now what that means is we have a new long run equilibrium. All right. So what that means is not only has the aggregate demand curve shifted to the left. So is the long run aggregate supply curve, and by extension, the short run aggregate supply curve as well. So a new norm, right? Your car is only doing 60. Okay. So what that basically means is that your car is working, but it's going really, really slow. And everything's messed up in the car, right? The engine's barely working, the battery's nearly dying. So everything is shifting left, right? So the risk is we're at a new norm, right? Which isn't really good. Now, we're in long run equilibrium, but it's a crappy long run equilibrium. And next week, we'll be talking about how does the government and the Federal Reserve get us back to maybe where we were, obviously, before the pandemic. And hopefully, even though the long run average supply curve takes a while to shift, hopefully policies in place will cause it to shift a lot quicker than normal. Okay, so I'm going to go back for a second. I just want to pull up the slides again, only because there was a bit of an interruption there. Okay. So, hey, some glitch there with some glitch with the system, but every time I try to go back out to stop share, it messes up. So I want everyone to understand from this graph is that basically fiscal policy, which we'll talk about next week, is the idea of the government trying to get us back, right? So here's a quick question for you guys. Playing a game of fight the mouse. Oh, giving up. A forest fire makes it impossible for truck drivers to deliver their shipments of gasoline. What direct effect will this have on the market? Or another way, the trucks can't get anywhere because there's no drivers, or it takes a while to inspect the meat because the health inspectors are sick, they've got COVID. So I'll give you guys a second to think about what the answer is to that. All right. Well, the actual answer is the answer is the answer is B. B as in ball. All right. So the answer to that question is drum roll, please. The answer is B. All right. So if you think about it, guys, a lot of stuff happening right now is because of the long one, because of the supply issue. So basically, here's a quick recap. There's two types of supply curves: long one and short one. The short one isn't relevant right now. Our focus is on the long one, right? We've even though it usually takes time for the long one to be messed up, everything's happened so quickly. Our economy is basically screwed right now. Pardon my French. The long run average supply curve is going to take a while, hopefully not too much, to come back to where it needs to be. Whether it's testing workers, whether it's fixing the workplace, whether it's getting people to feel comfortable again delivering goods. Now the president has ordered the meat companies to stay open. It'd be nice if he actually was putting the same type of focus into producing of the masks and other PPE materials. So good luck, and the next time I will focus on talking about classical economics and Keynesian economics. Have a good day. Stay healthy.